Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Cece, or Cecilia Doucette, and I am the Director of Education Services for the international nonprofit Wireless Education, and I am also the Director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology. I would like to thank WCCA TV in Worcester, Massachusetts for the opportunity to create a new series to bring forth education for the public, for our schools, for our families, and for our town municipal leaders, as well as our legislators. And the topic that we are covering is wireless risks and safer technology solutions. So, like many of you, I suspect, I had no idea there was anything to even question about using today's wireless technology. I used to run the local education foundation for my children's schools in Ashland, Massachusetts, and I ran campaign after campaign for 8 years to bring in wireless infrastructure, to bring in Chromebooks and iPads and minis and smartboards, and all this new technology we were told that our children would need to succeed in our world today. So, you know, as parents often will do, we'll step up and we'll help to do fundraising because our school budget simply could not afford this new equipment. Then, one night, I was at my book group, and my girlfriend Wendy is an electrical engineer, and she tipped us off that there could be something wrong with wireless. And I'm a technical and professional writer by trade, and at first, you know, I just kind of made a mental note of it because we were at book group and that's not what we were discussing. But then not long after that, I received information from another source inferring the same harm from wireless. So being a technical and professional writer, I thought, if there's anything to this, I want to know because I spent all these years bringing it into my kids' classrooms. And so I began to look for the science, and I thought it might be hard to find, but it's not at all. There are literally thousands of peer-reviewed, published studies all over the world showing great biological risk from today's wireless technology. So, with great thanks to many of the world's leading scientists, they put together something called the Bio-Initiative Report. And they have done a summary for the public that takes all of these studies that have been done and categorizes them into areas of harm. So this is what the Bio-Initiative Report looks like. This is just the cover. The contents are 1,600 pages of summaries of these studies. So I'm going to read to you the table of contents and their summary of key scientific evidence. Evidence to sperm damage and reproduction. And it was actually when I started reading the sperm studies for myself that I thought, oh, wow, we are in trouble here. They have taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas running, and it changed the DNA, which is our roadmap to grow a proper anything from a person to a plant to an animal or any kind of a biome. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, or it's causing the sperm to die off. Evidence that children are more vulnerable. So children are not just little people. Their very biological systems are still under development. Their DNA is still under development. Their immune system, their central nervous system is still under development. And you know, even before COVID-19, we were already at epidemic proportions of anxiety and depression, and we were seeing suicidal ideation in children like we have never seen before. We know this is a neurotoxin. Evidence for fetal and neonatal effects. So when we are growing a child, those cells are rapidly growing and rapidly duplicating. And if we are damaging the DNA that they are doing that growth from, then we can expect all sorts of poor outcomes. Evidence for effects on autism. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab here at Massachusetts General Hospital, and she sees huge connections between what we know scientifically happens with this wireless radiation and what is happening to the families in her care. Evidence for electrohypersensitivity. And way back during World War II, when we first started using radar, our government was doing studies on this. And they've known for decades that this man-made microwave radiation, we'll hear it called a few different things. EMF, which are the electromagnetic fields of this pulsation of microwave radiation that comes from all of our wireless technology. It's also called radio frequency radiation, but back in the day, it was called microwave sickness. And in this graphic from our friends at We Are the Evidence, I will read to you what some of these short-term symptoms are that people are having today and would never know to connect it to the emissions that they very well may have control over. The good news is, once we learn a little bit and decide, I have a choice in how I can use my technology, well, maybe I'm going to turn it off. Or maybe I'm going to create a sleep sanctuary and have a pure sleeping environment. Oftentimes when people make those kinds of choices, they come back and say, wow, these symptoms I had are gone, or they've gotten so much better. And so some of the early onset symptoms of microwave sickness affecting the brain are headaches, insomnia and sleep problems, dizziness, difficulty concentrating, memory problems, brain fog, chronic fatigue. And then a lot of people will recognize when they put a cell phone up to their head, sometimes they get a hot ear, right? So the ears, you can get a really bad ringing called tinnitus. You can get these sharp pains. You can become sensitive to noises. And then in the skin, we have like little antennas in the surface of our skin. And when we have these pulsations of microwave radiation hitting the skin, a lot of people develop skin rashes. They get itching, they get burning, they get tingling, or the nerves, for example, if you keep a cell phone in your pants pocket. I have a colleague in Framingham whose legs started going jiggity because the nerves in his leg were getting radiated. Mood, irritability, depression, anxiety, as we discussed. And for the eyes, the pressure in and behind the eyes, you can start developing eye twitches, your vision can start deteriorating, and cataracts can develop. And then there's our heart. So we have to remember that we are biologically electrical organs. That's why they do EKGs. That's why they do EEGs in the hospital to measure the wavelengths and the frequencies of the pulsations of energy in our heart and in our brains. So when we are immersed in this electrosmog, some people, and depending on your own body, your heart may start going too fast or it may start going too slow. So we have palpitations and arrhythmia, chest pains. I've heard people say that it feels like somebody's sitting on their chest sometimes. Difficulty breathing, high or low blood pressure. And then there's a whole host of other short-term complications. It can do with your adrenals, your digestive system, weight loss or gain, dehydration, hair loss, feeling like you've got the flu, but it never really quite comes on. And then attention deficit disorders. Dr. Hugh Taylor, who runs the OBGYN program for Yale Medical School, has done some of the rodent studies. And when he and his team exposed the pregnant rodents, the mice, to this microwave radiation from our cell phones, when the pregnant moms gave birth to the pups, they came out bouncing off the walls of the cages, much like a child who is suffering from attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder. So this is all very well documented in the scientific literature. So back to the bioinitiative report. Aside from the electrohypersensitivity and the autism and the neonatal and the child and the reproductive, we also see something happening with the blood-brain barrier. And Dr. Palpatcher and other scientists years ago discovered that, well, they knew we have a membrane surrounding our brain that protects us from toxins that would normally escort out through the bloodstream to keep them from going into sensitive areas like the brain. Dr. Patcher and other scientists have discovered that when the brain is bombarded with microwave radiation, it permeates or opens up that blood-brain barrier. So instead of the blood escorting the toxins out, it can now take a turn right into your brain. And so it's no wonder that we have so many more neurological issues since we all started using wireless technology. And then there is evidence for effects on our genes. As I said, this damages DNA, so it is genotoxic. And then there's evidence for effects on cancer. Our own government, through the National Toxicology Program, which is part of the National Institutes of Health here in the U.S., they completed a $30 million study over 2 decades, and they went in expecting to prove that cell phones were safe because cell phones were the technology of the day back then. And instead, after an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health, they concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories that they can assign. So, clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. And then we also have evidence on the effects of melatonin, breast cancer, Alzheimer's disease. This is a neurotoxin. And with the melatonin, what the science is telling us is that our body operates off of light. And we have our circadian rhythm that operates off of the light cycle 24 hours a day. So in the wee hours of darkness, our pineal gland in the brain releases melatonin. Melatonin then goes in and regulates our sleep cycle, but it also helps to escort the toxins of the day out through the bloodstream. What the science is showing us is that our brains cannot differentiate between natural daylight and this man-made light energy form that is radio frequency microwave radiation. And if we don't know any better and we leave that pulsating at us all night long, our brain thinks the lights are on. And so in many cases, it doesn't properly release the melatonin to go in and regulate our sleep cycle and clean up the everyday cell repair and regeneration. So we are doing ourselves a great disservice when we know about wireless risks and then don't choose to do something about it. So I started finding the science and I started sharing it with Ashland Public Schools. And I got back crickets. And I didn't get it. And I thought if we had a leak in our science lab, a gas leak, they would evacuate the building and protect the students and the staff, right? That's what I thought we would do with this. But this came out of left field for my schools. And I really started investigating this over the summer, which is the busiest season for a school district administrators because they're closing out one fiscal year, they're starting another fiscal year, they're doing all their new hires, they're getting all their projects done, their staff training. So I really thought somebody would respond though. And ultimately, our school committee chairwoman, Lori Tosti, is very bright. She had 4 children in the schools. She is an attorney. She's also a certified yoga professional. She was volunteering at the women's prison, at the hospice center at our hospital, so she's the right kind of heart-centered person. So Chairwoman Tosti and I started sharing information back and forth, and I'm sending her what I'm finding, like, did you know that in 2008 the French National Library took Wi-Fi out because of the biological risks? And we were finding pockets in Belgium and Italy and Israel where they were removing it from the schools because of the evidence that was coming to bear on this topic. So it was not an easy conversation at all to have because while we're all loving our technology, the industry is pushing this in and pushing this in. But I think it was when our schools looked at the legal fine print that comes with all of our devices that perhaps they had a legal uh-oh moment. So for those of you with us today, I invite you to take out, if you have an iPhone, take out your iPhone and go into settings. Once you're in settings, scroll down just a little bit and hit general. From general, go all the way down to legal and regulatory, which I believe you'll see second from the bottom. And if you don't have an iPhone, you can just simply do a search on your phone make and model and then type in RF exposure, radio frequency radiation exposure. So from settings to general, down to legal and regulatory, and when you're in that next menu, about 4 down, you will see RF exposure, which is microwave, two-way microwave radiation that they politely call energy in this fine print disclaimer. So when we read the legal fine print that's been in there all along, it tells us 2 really important things. One, this device was tested at a distance from the body. So if you're tucking this into your bra or your shirt pocket or your suit pocket, or you're tucking it into your waistband or you're putting it in your back pocket, you may well exceed the Federal Communications Commission's public radiation exposure limits. And then a little further down, it says, if you don't want to be this exposed, use a hands-free option like speakerphone or a headset. Now, what we've learned is that if you have a radiating device like a tablet or a cell phone, you don't want to just plug a regular headset into it because radiation amplifies with metal. So if you just plug a traditional headset in and then plug that into your head at the other end, you've created a pathway for that radiation to travel from your device directly up basically to your brain. So as we get into these conversations, please know the message is not no technology. We love our technology. We live by it. We rely on it, and it brings us much benefit. But it's high time we be given the facts so that we can choose safe and responsible technology. So for every problem we've created, there's a solution that you and I can create or that somebody else has already thought of. So for that headset, you'd be wise to look for something called a hollow tube headset. And this would plug into your device like, you have a cell phone. You could plug it into this and then put the cell phone as far away from you as you can, right? That creates distance, which is great. And then a hollow tube or an air tube headset only has rubber tips. There's no metal to bring the ambient radiation up to your brain. And then it's got these little ferrite beads here that break any of the radiation that would be coming up the wire. And it's still got good acoustics and stuff. So think of it as like a doctor's stethoscope. It's going to bring the audio up to your head without bringing the radiation. So our government at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention already recognizes that with what's called ionizing radiation, that can break the atom, and we know that the sun can do that, we know that gamma rays can do that, we know that X-rays can do that. And so if you go to the Centers for Disease Control, you will find a page about electromagnetic fields, and it says it's a 3-pronged approach to keep yourself safe. 1, keep as much distance as you can from a radiating device. 2, spend as little time as possible in those radio emissions. And 3, if you can't get away from it, you should really think about shielding. And in future episodes, we will hope to bring conversations with professionals who have been heavily trained and certified to help you do shielding of your spaces. That's a profession called building biology, and we're so fortunate that they are a growing profession, and they have a directory at the Building Biology Institute where you may be able to hire a professional to come to your home and help you assess if you're not a do-it-yourselfer. So that's what the science was telling us. And so when our school district was looking at this, it puts us all between a rock and a hard place because the industry got to the state level already and already embedded this technology into their evaluation system to say you need to put this technology into your curriculum or you may get a poor review at the state level. So when we bring this up to our schools, they look at you like deer in the headlights because, what are they supposed to do? Well, I think when our schools saw that legal fine print, we ultimately became the first in the nation to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms. And I'll tell you what it says. It says, best practices for mobile devices. Turn off these devices when not in use. Turn the Wi-Fi on only when needed. So all those Wi-Fi access points that have been installed all over our schools, not a good idea. Always place the mobile device on a solid surface because that's what the legal fine print says, right? Keep distance. And you want to preferably use it on something other than a metal surface because metal amplifies radiation. So we became the first in the United States to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms. And I was very grateful, but they were waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. So our children in our schools are still being radiated on a daily basis. We have done some really important work with the legislature, and we'll talk about that in another episode. But as I was assimilating all this science, I kept thinking, surely somebody has got to have our backs on this, right? Because I was just little me. And if I can go look at this and find literally thousands of studies all over the world showing great biological harm, somebody must be protecting us. So I fell down the rabbit hole in 2013. It was 2014 when we had this best practices for mobile devices sign hanging in our classrooms. And then in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with a free online 59-page report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. So when I read Captured Agency, that was my missing piece, because when we look at the graphic even that they chose for the cover, they show a revolving door, because that's what many of our federal agencies have become, a revolving door between industry and government, and they are protecting industry's best interest and not the public interest. So, for example, way back in the 1990s, the first neuro-oncologist recognized that his patient died of these unusual tumors on the side of her brain, not in the middle of the brain where a brain tumor might normally present, but on the side of her brain, and they lined up with the antennas in the cell phone. And so this got on Larry King Live, and overnight it became a public relations nightmare. So, stock prices start dropping. So the industry steps up and says, well, we can do the research. We have the funding. Let us do the research. So they partnered with our government. They hired this Dr. George Carlo. Dr. Carlo put a team of maybe 200 scientists in place, and for years they did the research on this because they brought this technology out of our military, which was built for warfare, for radar, and they brought it into the public sector with no biological safety testing. So at the end of the day, Dr. Carlo and his team report back to the Cellular Telephone Industry Association, which is rebranded today. It's called CTIA, the wireless industry. Dr. Carlo reports back to the head of the CTIA and says, it looks like this really did kill that woman, and children are especially vulnerable. And there's something in science called the precautionary principle, which says, even if the science is still underway and we still have some questions, if it looks like there's something that puts the public or the environment at risk, we're supposed to stop and not resume until it's proven safe. Well, that's not what our government and industry chose to do. They buried the science and they continued to roll out all this wireless technology. So Captured Agency was what made me realize that there's no cavalry coming. We have got to take charge of this ourselves. And I think education is the first step, right? And so I am so honored to be able to get out and speak. My bachelor's degree is in communication studies. My master's from Northeastern University is in technical and professional writing. And I'm one of 10 children, so I popped out of the womb having to deal with a lot of different personalities. So communicating is my happy place. So if anything that we can do during these forums that we're going to have with WCCA TV to help you learn about the risks and perhaps just start taking baby steps, what might you do today? Start looking around. Where are your wireless exposures? How often do you have an active device in your hand or on your lap, or perhaps even earbuds where you're putting a microwave transmitter on both sides of your brain? Not a great idea. But the good news is that once people learn a little bit, they're like, I didn't want to know it, I don't want to believe it, but some of those microwave sickness symptoms really started to resonate with me, so I took a chance. And I took your advice and I created a sleep sanctuary, which simply means turn it all off. When I first got started, and I circled my tail for a good long while, I ultimately hardwired everything in my house. And that's not rocket science either. On the back of your router, wherever your internet connection is coming in from the street, that's where your router is hooked up. And if you flip that around and look, there are Ethernet ports. All you need to do is get an Ethernet cable and run it to wherever you use most of your technology. And then if your device has an Ethernet jack on the other end of it, then you just plug it in directly. Oftentimes, though, you can purchase a little adapter, like this is the lightning adapter, that allows me to hardwire an iPhone. And who knew? Right? Who knew you can even hardwire a mobile device? But there's a Thunderbolt adapter for the MacBook. There are other adapters for the Chromebooks and the iPads. So most devices can be hardwired. And then you just simply go into the settings and turn off the cellular data antenna, the Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi, the locator, the hotspot. And if anybody didn't know any better and already upgraded to 5G technology, there are additional antennas in there, and we'll teach you more about 5G in a coming episode. But for today, when my kids were growing up and something freaked them out, I would say, go scream into a pillow, physically get out of your body, and then come back and let's talk about solutions. So thank you for joining us today. We are so grateful that you're tuning in to Wireless Risks and Safer Technology Solutions. Thank you so much.